Jesus Never Existed by Kenneth Humphreys, audiobook version. Chapter 8, 4th section, Theodosius, Murdering the Competition. Theodosius, first of the Spanish Inquisitors, the assault upon paganism. A triumphant Christian church, far from unifying the Roman world with a single faith, rent division and civil conflict throughout the empire. Every measure designed to crush and stamp out non-Christian belief met with renewed resistance, disaffection from the imperial cause, and civil commotion. Yet the fanatical intolerance rampaged on, with increasingly more severe rescripts from the imperial court. The campaign to wipe out heterodox opinion realized its zenith with the reign of Theodosius I, late in the 4th century. Murdering fanatic arrives from Spain. Quote, "The statesmanlike decision of Gratian to elevate to the purple the competent son of a convicted traitor was of great significance in Roman history. Ultimately, the dynasty of Theodosius presided over the dismemberment of the Roman Empire in the West." Ferrell, page 68. Theodosius, one of those luminaries of the church accorded the honorific Great, showed that a Christian emperor could best any pagan emperor for folly, indulgence, and cruelty. While a Caligula or a Nero could unleash murder and mayhem on his family and entourage, Theodosius criminalized and punished a large part of the population of the whole empire, of which his treatment of Thessalonica is one notable example. In 390, the Romano-Greek population of the city was involved in a riot over the intimidating presence of the local Gothic garrison. In the tumult, Botheric, the garrison commander, died. Enraged, Theodosius ordered his Gothic mercenaries to massacre spectators who happened to be trapped in the circus. From Theodore, 393 to 466, in his ecclesiastical history, quote, "Thessalonica is a large and populous city in the province of Macedonia. In consequence of sedition there, the anger of the emperor rose to the highest pitch, and he gratified his vindictive desire for vengeance by unsheathing the sword most unjustly and tyrannically against all, slaying the innocent and guilty alike. It is said 7,000 perished without any forms of law, and without even having judicial sentence passed upon them, but that, like ears of wheat in the time of harvest, they were alike cut down." W.S. Davis, Readings in Ancient History. Unlike earlier tyrants, by the late 4th century, thanks largely to the reforms of Diocletian and Constantine, emperors had at their disposal a formidable and costly state apparatus. Draconian laws now could be energetically enforced. The world's earliest totalitarianism of Catholic Christianity was inaugurated by Theodosius. No wonder to Christian scribes he became the Great. In short order, the Roman world was compelled to be Christian on pain of death. The fall of empire in the West was an acceptable price for the triumph of the Church of Christ. Theodosius had, in his privileged youth, been military governor of Moesia, but after a charge of cowardice and his father's execution for conspiracy, he had languished in enforced early retirement in Spain. Yet when disaster hit the Roman world at Adrianople in 378, the debacle led Gratian, an inexperienced and pious 19-year-old, to appoint the 32-year-old Theodosius as Augustus for the East. It was a reign almost cut short. After falling dangerously ill in 380 in Thessalonica, Theodosius was baptized by the local Catholic bishop, Acolius. Unfortunately for the fate of civilization, thereafter, Theodosius was more concerned with religious correctness than with the safety of the empire, which now fell into his hands. Winning hearts and minds by capital punishment. Quote, "It is our will and pleasure that none of our subjects, whether magistrates or private citizens, however exalted or however humble may be their rank and condition, shall presume in any city or in any place to worship an inanimate idol by the sacrifice of a guiltless victim." With these words of an imperial edict in 384 AD, Theodosius made divination from the entrails of a chicken a crime of high treason which could be expiated only by the death penalty. All the many and popular manifestations of pagan worship were criminalized. Torch-bearing processions, the wearing of garlands, the burning of frankincense, the offering of libations of wine. Even harmless household gods were prescribed, whereas earlier laws enacted against the pagans had often been mitigated or ignored by local magistrates who were themselves pagans or secular philosophers. Now, a magistrate who failed to rigorously enforce the draconian laws would himself become a criminal. To the delight of the Christian priesthood, their, quote, pious emperor set the entire machinery of the state against the pagan establishment. It was the clergy itself, however, who made up the vigilante brown shirts, desecrating temples and destroying idols. At every level, the old religions were to be rooted out, and joy of joy, the accumulated wealth of 1,000 shrines and temples amassed over a millennium, expropriated for the Christian church. Once engorged on the wealth of the pagan world, the church, in an act of sublime cynicism, moved rapidly to reintroduce the rituals and practices it had so assiduously extirpated. In 381, Theodosius issued the first of 15 edicts directed against heretics and pagans. His edicts supported the destruction of non-Christian temples and places of worship, the burning of heterodox writings, and the exile or execution of those holding heterodox or heathen belief and being unwilling to correct or convert. Folly and religious war, Goths and pagans. Theodosius, entrusted initially with the defense of Thrace, bought peace with the Goths by ceding large tracts of the Balkans for their settlement. Rather than hunt down and defeat the victors of Adrianople, Theodosius decided to accept them as allies. Indeed, when the Gothic king Athanaric died in 382, he was honoured with a state funeral in Constantinople. Unlike most Roman citizens, however, the Goths were armed and ignored Roman law with impunity. Ruled by their own chieftains and not subject to crippling imperial taxation, these Christianized tribesmen lived off the local populace as conquering heroes. Having thus accommodated the enemy within the empire, Theodosius then recruited whole regiments of the barbarians under their own officers into the army, where they became the dominant influence. Barbarianization of the army went hand in hand with the enfeeblement of the legions. Starved of funds which Theodosius instead directed into the church to support a growing army of parasitic clergy, the demoralized troops were forced into part-time farming to feed themselves. The greater part of the legions were downgraded to border guards. As such, they lacked the pan-continental mobility of an earlier age. Allowed to marry local women, the troops spent much of their time in market gardens and the barter economy. In such circumstances, the tight discipline and continuous drill which had allowed the Romans to defeat every barbarian enemy from the Scottish Highlands to the Syrian desert had to be abandoned. The troopers also set aside their protective armour, which had become burdensome and expensive, ironically, at the very time the barbarian cavalries were adopting a simplified version of Roman armour. The border guards, as a matter of policy, avoided pitched battles with the enemy, a task now assigned to a few elite units of a mobile field army, which increasingly became little more than an overblown imperial bodyguard. For the Eastern Front, Theodosius adopted a cowardly policy of ceding 4/5 of Roman Armenia to the Persians in 387. Having thus secured his rear and barbarianized his legions, Theodosius used them to intervene in the religious politics of the West, where Gratian had been deposed by another Spanish Catholic, his general Magnus Maximus. Gratian was executed in August 383 in Gaul, leaving his hapless 12-year-old young half-brother Valentinian II taking instruction from Milan city boss Bishop Ambrose. The bishop, wary of the rival Arian Christianity widespread in the East and among the Gothic tribesmen, wrote a tract clarifying the new doctrine of the Trinity for the guidance and edification of the young prince. It was ostensibly on behalf of Valentinian II, Theodosius used his mercenaries to bring to an end the reign of Maximus, using an army mainly composed of Goths, Huns and Alans at the Battle of Aquileia. A few years later, Valentinian was sent packing by another usurper, Eugenius, 392 to 394, a former teacher of grammar and rhetoric, and Theodosius massed his barbarian Christian mercenaries against the regular pagan legions of the West. The Battle of the Frigidus River, 6 September 394, on the border of Italy and Slovenia, proved to be the last serious attempt of the senatorial class to resist the Christianization of the empire. Fighting at the head of 20,000 barbarians on the side of Theodosius was the Gothic chieftain Alaric, who 16 years later would sack Rome itself. The menace behind the throne, Bishop Ambrose. Quote, "Nothing can be found in this world more exalted than priests or more sublime than bishops." Bishop Ambrose. Since the days of Constantine, bishops had inveigled their way into the imperial entourage. Compare this to the position of Stoic philosophers at an earlier date. Ambrose famously brought Theodosius to heel and penitence over the massacre in Thessalonica, an incident carefully written up by Christian scribes to give maximum credit to the church. Yet the true character of the ambitious Ambrose was shown in his power struggle a few years earlier with the Empress Justina, regent for the young monarch Valentinian II, whose authority and faith he rejected out of hand and used Christian mobs to back up his position. At the moment when it seemed that the mob might have been seen off by the imperial guard, Ambrose miraculously discovered martyrs' bones in the besieged churchyard, and mob rule prevailed. The creation of saints and miracles now became a staple weapon in the Christian armory. Ambrose, having asserted his authority over the feeble-minded youths Gratian and Valentinian, was not inclined to cede power to the new Catholic monarch Theodosius, nor was Theodosius the man to stand up to the senior churchman. In a notable incident, Ambrose, to his horror, learnt that the emperor had ordered Christian arsonists rebuild a destroyed synagogue. The bishop defended the zealots and censured the emperor, who meekly rescinded his decision. Theodosius maintained an imperial court in both Milan and Constantinople. The year 394 was the last in which a single monarch ruled the Roman world. Yet with Ambrose as the grey eminence, that unity merely amplified the insidious influence of the Catholic bishop. He saw off the challenge of the Arians and successfully propagated the notions of the Trinity, discipline and regimentation. Anti-Semitism became encoded in Theodosius's vast catalogue of intolerant laws, and women were made more subordinate than ever. The prison of the late Roman world now became dark and forbidding. Christ, assured Bishop Ambrose, was now at the head of the legions,